It was a bright Saturday afternoon, and Michael Carter sat in the plush lounge chair by the pool in his new house. The sun was high in the sky, casting its golden rays over his two-story home, nestled in one of Atlanta's most desirable neighborhoods. After 15 years of serving, as a police officer, Michael had finally achieved his dream, owning a house with a backyard pool that sparkled in the Georgia sun. For years he had worked tirelessly, saving every penny, working overtime shifts, and sacrificing his weekends to get to this point. Now, here he was, lounging in peace, sipping a cold drink, and enjoying the serenity he'd earned. The air was calm, the birds chirped in the distance, and for a brief moment, Michael felt the weight of his past life. The stress, the chaos, the endless hours, all melt away. But the calm was short-lived. As Michael closed his eyes, drifting into the kind of peaceful relaxation he hadn't experienced in years, the sudden sound of police sirens shattered the tranquility. His eyes snapped open as two patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of his driveway. The officers jumped out, their hands instinctively resting on their holsters as they approached the house. "Sir, we've received a report of a suspicious individual trespassing in your pool area," one of the officers said, his eyes scanning the yard. Michael's stomach tightened. He knew exactly who had made that call. Turning his head slightly, he caught a glimpse of her, Karen Thompson, peeking through her curtains, her eyes gleaming with a smug satisfaction. Michael had been trying to avoid this moment for weeks, but it seemed inevitable. The neighborhood was no stranger to Karen's antics, and this was about to escalate into something much bigger. But this time, Michael wasn't going to back down. As the officers waited for him to respond, he stood up slowly, his muscles tense. The warmth of the sun no longer felt welcoming. It was as though the heat was now rising from within him. "I know exactly who called," Michael said coolly, his eyes still locked on Karen's silhouette behind the window. "And I'm not letting her get away with this anymore." It had all started so innocently. Michael had moved into the neighborhood just a couple of months ago, excited to start a new chapter of his life. After years of serving as a police officer, he finally had the time and resources to settle into his dream home. The previous owners had taken immaculate care of the property, and Michael had quickly fallen in love with the backyard pool. It was crystal clear, a true centerpiece of the home, and he could already imagine many afternoons spent relaxing in it. But it didn't take long for the peace to be disturbed. The first encounter with Karen Thompson had been nothing more than a brief, awkward moment. Michael was arranging his patio furniture when he saw her standing in the window of her second-floor bedroom, staring at him intently, her phone pressed to her ear. Michael waved politely, but she disappeared behind the curtains almost immediately, as if he had never existed. The next day, Michael had noticed something strange when he got home from the hardware store. His security camera app pinged, showing movement near the pool. When he checked the footage, there she was, Karen Thompson, walking through the unlocked gate at the back of his property, as though she owned the place. She was wearing a designer swimsuit and carrying a luxurious beach towel. Without a care in the world, she laid her towel on one of his pool chairs, dipped her feet in the water, and began to relax. Michael's blood began to boil. When he confronted her, she played it off like it was no big deal. She even had the audacity to claim that she had assumed he was the new pool maintenance man, and that the previous owners had given her permission to use the pool whenever she liked. "Oh, I thought you were the pool guy," Karen said with a dismissive wave, as if she had every right to be there. "The last owners always let me use the pool." Michael's blood pressure spiked. This wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a blatant act of entitlement. He had worked hard for this home, and no one, especially not her, was going to take advantage of it. "Ma'am, I'm not the pool guy," Michael replied, his voice steady but firm. "I'm the new owner, and I'd appreciate it if you'd ask permission before stepping foot on my property." Karen's reaction was something Michael would never forget. Her face twisted in disbelief, followed by a laugh that made his skin crawl. "The owner?" Karen scoffed. "There must be some mistake. I know the realtor who handled this place, and she never mentioned—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking back to him with an unspoken implication. It wasn't hard to figure out the racial undertones of her comment, even if she didn't outright say it. Michael was no stranger to discrimination or prejudice, but that didn't mean he was going to stand for it. Keeping his composure, he said again, "There's no mistake. This is my home, and you're trespassing. Please leave." Her condescending smile never faded as she gathered her things and walked off, muttering under her breath. "We'll see about that." It started with small annoyances. Karen would show up at odd hours, peering over the fence, lurking around his property. At first, Michael tried to ignore it, convincing himself it was just his mind playing tricks. But when the incidents became more frequent, he realized that this woman was not just invading his space. She was trying to push him, test his boundaries. One Saturday morning, Michael woke up to the sound of splashing water and laughter. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy from sleep, and went to his window to see what was happening. What he saw made his stomach drop. There, in his backyard, was Karen, this time with 4 of her friends, dancing around in the pool like they were the rightful owners of the house. The pool party was in full swing. His pool, his property. Anger boiled inside him, but he kept it in check, just like he'd been trained. With a deep breath, he marched outside onto his patio. His voice was calm but firm as he called out to the group, "Ladies, you need to leave. This is private property." Karen's response was as dismissive as ever. "Oh, don't be difficult, Michael," she said with a smug grin. "We're just having some fun. Besides, this pool barely gets used anyway." She waved a hand, as though she were doing him a favor by spicing things up. Her friends seemed uncomfortable, shifting in their expensive swimsuits, glancing nervously at each other. One of them whispered, "Karen said we had permission," but they didn't seem too convinced. "This is your final warning, Mrs. Thompson," Michael said, maintaining his composure. "The next time you trespass on my property, I'll be calling the police." Karen sneered at him, her eyes narrowing in defiance. "Go ahead," she scoffed. "My husband plays golf with Captain Richards. I know everyone at the precinct." The conversation was over, but Michael was far from done. He had been too calm, too professional, but now he knew exactly what he needed to do. He had to get it all on record. That afternoon, he took a few hours to install additional security cameras around the perimeter of his property. Michael had spent enough time in law enforcement to know that when it came to situations like this, documentation was key. The more evidence he gathered, the better. He wasn't just going to let Karen get away with this again. Within days, his cameras caught Karen trying to access his property in more subtle ways. She would walk around his backyard, inspecting the fence, peeking through his windows, trying to find a way in. One evening, he saw her attempting to use a key, one that had clearly been copied from the previous owners, to unlock his gate. That was it. The line had been crossed. With all the footage he needed, Michael contacted the police. It wasn't long before 2 officers, familiar faces from his years on the force, arrived at his door. Officers Davis and Martinez had worked with Michael for years, and when they saw the footage, they understood immediately. "You did the right thing, Mike," Officer Davis said after watching the footage. "We'll take care of it." The next day, Karen's plan came crashing down. When the officers arrived at her house, Karen's initial act was to turn on the tears. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here," she said dramatically, her voice shaky. "This man is harassing us. We've had pool privileges with the previous owners for years, and now he's being unreasonable." But Officer Martinez wasn't buying it. He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at Karen. "Ma'am, if Mr. Carter says you're trespassing, you're trespassing. Please leave before we have to make this official." Karen's face flushed with embarrassment, but she quickly gathered her things and left, muttering under her breath. "This isn't over," she hissed as she turned to go. But for Michael, this was just the beginning. The more Karen pushed, the more evidence he gathered. The more she escalated her behavior, the more he realized she was digging her own grave. After the police incident, Karen's behavior didn't change. If anything, it only got worse. The peace Michael had hoped for when he moved into his dream home was rapidly slipping away. She seemed determined to make his life miserable, and it was clear she wasn't going to stop, unless she was confronted head-on. But Michael wasn't the type to let things slide. He had years of experience in law enforcement, and that meant he knew exactly how to handle a bully. It wasn't about getting back at her. It was about making sure she understood there were consequences for crossing the line. The first sign that Karen's tactics were starting to backfire came during the next HOA meeting. Michael had been busy with work and hadn't given much thought to the ongoing neighborhood gossip, but the meeting was a mandatory affair, so he had to attend. What he didn't expect was the drama that would unfold. As soon as Karen got her turn to speak, she launched into a speech about how the neighborhood was going downhill because of people like Michael. She started going on about how his reckless behavior was bringing down property values and making the area unsafe. It was an ironic speech, considering the only reckless behavior was hers. She had broken into his house and harassed him repeatedly. But instead of speaking up right away, Michael waited. He knew there was a way to shut her down, and it had nothing to do with arguing. When Karen finished her speech, Michael stood up slowly, his phone in hand. "Interesting you should mention property values," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. "Would you care to explain this?" He hit play on his phone, and the video footage started. The first clip showed Karen sneaking through his backyard gate, trying to access his property. The next clip was of her watering his plants with a plant killer in the dead of night. And finally, the most damning clip, Karen on his pool chairs with her friends, splashing around in the water. The room was silent. Michael let the video play for a few seconds longer before hitting pause and looking directly at Karen. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. I didn't realize your concern for property values extended to destroying them." Her face turned a deep shade of red, but she tried to save face. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "This is a misunderstanding. It was just a harmless mistake." "Oh, I don't think so," Michael said, his tone unwavering. "These aren't mistakes. These are deliberate actions. And now everyone knows it." The room, which had previously been tense, suddenly broke out into murmurs. Some of the neighbors started to nod in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. Karen's influence, which she had used to manipulate the community for so long, was finally slipping away. But the most satisfying moment came when Michael showed the final piece of evidence. It was a video from his security cameras showing Karen pouring dish soap into his pool, turning the water into a bubbly mess. His anger flared as he watched the clip in real time. His beautiful pool, the centerpiece of his property, ruined by her petty actions. Karen stood frozen in front of the crowd, her carefully curated persona of neighborhood matriarch crumbling before her. She was humiliated, absolutely exposed. When the meeting adjourned, Karen left quickly without speaking to anyone. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting around, but no one said a word to her. Michael, on the other hand, had a feeling of quiet satisfaction. He hadn't done anything illegal, nothing that would lead to a confrontation he couldn't handle. All he had done was document the truth. And now, everyone knew exactly who Karen was. As Michael watched her retreat, a plan began to form. It wasn't just about getting her out of his life. It was about making sure she learned that her actions had consequences, and it was time to teach her a lesson she would never forget. By now, Michael had learned that Karen was not just a nuisance. She was a bully who was used to getting away with everything. It was time to turn the tables. He had something planned, something she would never see coming. Michael had done his research. He'd remembered a conversation from years ago with an old partner about a special type of dye used in pool maintenance. The dye was completely non-toxic and could be used to detect leaks in the pool. But there was a catch. It would only react with certain chemicals found in cosmetics and sunscreens, the kinds of products Karen and her friends were known to slather on when they accidentally visited his pool. Michael smiled to himself as the plan started to come together. He ordered the dye online, careful to ensure it was safe, temporary, and effective. He needed to make sure that whatever happened, Karen couldn't spin this into an accusation of harm or foul play. It needed to be harmless, but memorable. The dye arrived a few days later, and Michael immediately tested it. He had seen Karen's favorite sunscreen brand left behind on his pool chairs before, and when he applied the dye to a small sample of it, the results were perfect. The sunscreen turned bright green once it came into contact with the dye, and it stayed that way for days. The water looked normal to the naked eye, but the moment Karen and her friends entered, they would be in for an unforgettable surprise. The timing couldn't have been better. Word on the street was that Karen was planning another pool party for that weekend, this time with a few more people from her social circle, all eager to take a dip in Michael's pool. She had no idea that this time, she was about to become the star of her own embarrassing reality show. Michael carefully mixed the dye into the pool, following the exact instructions. The water looked clear and inviting, just like always. He set up his cameras, positioning them at various angles to capture every moment of the inevitable chaos that was about to unfold. The next morning, Michael left his house early. He made sure Karen saw him leave, making it look like he was going to be gone all day. He parked his car a few blocks away and walked back to his house through a side gate, entering his home office, which had the perfect view of the pool. It was time to let karma do its thing. At precisely 2 p.m., Michael's phone pinged with a notification from his security system. Karen was back, right on schedule. She strolled confidently through the gate, followed by 6 of her friends. They were all carrying designer beach bags, dressed in expensive swimsuits, and looking as though they had been planning this private pool party for weeks. As Karen stepped onto his property, she looked around with an air of ownership, her usual smug expression plastered across her face. "Ladies," she announced grandly, raising a glass, "welcome to our Saturday sanctuary." The others exchanged uneasy glances, but their hesitation was quickly overcome by the promise of a luxurious afternoon. They unpacked their things, spread out towels, and set up their party with champagne, fruit, and Bluetooth speakers. The scene looked like something out of a glossy magazine spread, but Michael knew what was about to happen. He settled back in his chair, the anticipation building. It didn't take long. One by one, they began to dip into the pool, the cool water lapping around their legs as they relaxed in the sun. Karen was the first to dive in, making an elegant splash. She smiled, calling out to the others, "The water's perfect. Come on in, girls." As the last of them entered the pool, Michael saw the first sign of trouble. Karen's friend, Susan, was the first to notice something strange. Karen," she called, staring down at her arm. "Is your skin looking different?" The other women froze, looking at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" Karen asked dismissively, turning to her friend. But when Karen looked down at her own arms, she let out a shriek. Her skin, once fair, was now a bright, unmistakable shade of green. Her hands, her legs, everything was covered in an eerie green tint that seemed to shimmer under the afternoon sun. "What is this?" Karen yelled, her voice rising in panic. Susan, then one of the others, noticed it too. They all began to examine themselves in a frenzy, realizing the same thing was happening to them. Their expensive swimsuits and manicures were now streaked with the same green tint. They scrambled out of the pool, their faces contorted in disbelief, their designer outfits ruined by the bizarre, vibrant color. Is this permanent? One of the women asked, clutching at her arms, her face pale. Michael couldn't help but smile to himself as he watched the chaos unfold. He had been patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, it was happening. This was the perfect revenge. Legal, harmless, and unforgettable. Karen and her friends quickly gathered their things, but their frantic, panicked movements only made the situation more embarrassing. As they raced toward the gate, Michael couldn't help but notice one of them glance over at the security cameras, now fully aware that everything had been caught on tape. But it was too late. The damage had been done. As Karen and her friends fled Michael's backyard, a trail of green footprints left behind them. The entire neighborhood seemed to freeze in place. It wasn't just that they had been caught trespassing. This was something else. This was public humiliation at its finest. Michael knew that the moment those women hit the street, the story would spread like wildfire. And he was right. The footage from his cameras didn't take long to go viral. Michael had already set up his editing software and started piecing together the sequence. Karen's earlier trespassing incidents, the repeated attempts to sabotage him, and then the icing on the cake, the green pool disaster. He uploaded it to social media and set it to the same jazz music that had been playing during their pool party. The juxtaposition of the casual, carefree mood of the music with the chaos unfolding was perfect. Michael's voiceover, cool and collected, narrated the backstory in brief, adding context to what the viewers were about to witness. As soon as the video went live, it began spreading. People were sharing it by the second. It wasn't long before local news stations picked it up. The headline was simple but striking. Trespassing Karen gets green with envy. The video cut between shots of Karen's increasingly frantic behavior, her friends scrambling out of the pool, and close-up shots of the green tint spreading on their skin. The comments section exploded with laughter, people tagging their friends and sharing their own Karen stories. Some even posted memes of Karen's now infamous green skin. But the real kicker was what happened next. As the video went viral, Karen's real estate agency, where she had worked for years, began receiving an influx of calls. Potential clients were asking whether they could trust an agent who trespassed on private property. Some even sent emails with screenshots of the video attached. The agency had no choice but to release a statement the following Monday. Their Facebook page was flooded with comments, many of them filled with laughing emojis or green-colored texts. The statement was a feeble attempt to salvage her reputation. "We pride ourselves on respect for property rights, and the actions shown in the video do not reflect our company's values." But by then, it was too late. The damage had been done, and Karen's credibility was in tatters. The neighborhood WhatsApp group buzzed with activity. Neighbors who had been too scared to speak up during Karen's campaign of harassment now found their voices. People began sharing their stories about Karen's underhanded behavior, how she had tried to sabotage the Johnsons' kids' lemonade stand, how she had reported the Rodriguez family's Christmas decorations as too ethnic. Each new story added fuel to the fire. But what Michael loved most was how quickly his quiet little neighborhood came together in the face of this shared injustice. The video had become the talk of the town, and it wasn't just Michael taking the high road anymore. Everyone who had been affected by Karen's antics now felt empowered to speak up. The day after the video went viral, Karen tried to do damage control. She recorded her own video in an attempt to explain herself. With her face still tinged green, she tried to sound sincere, but the combination of her angry words and the green hue on her face made her look more like an enraged cartoon character than someone who was trying to salvage her reputation. "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe, to maintain standards," she said, her voice quivering. "It's not my fault that this man—" But as she spoke, the comments poured in. "Green with envy," one person wrote. "You should have asked permission, Karen." Another comment said, "Are you going to take that dye out of your hair too? Or is that part of the standard?" By the time Karen's video was posted, the green memes had already taken over. She was the punchline of every joke, the target of every sarcastic comment, and no amount of PR could save her. The video had not only caught the attention of locals, but had spread across social media platforms, becoming a viral sensation. The green-tinted fiasco turned Karen into a laughingstock. Michael, on the other hand, had his peace. While Karen scrambled to fix the unfixable, Michael enjoyed his backyard, now truly the heart of the neighborhood. He couldn't help but chuckle as he watched Karen's video. His only response to her was the original footage, more evidence of her bad behavior. By the time the weekend came, Michael had already planned his next pool party. But this time, it was a celebration of community, not revenge. The following week, as Michael lounged by his pool, watching children play and neighbors chat, the neighborhood felt different. It felt right. People were finally coming together. The once divided community, shaken by Karen's toxic influence, had started to rebuild itself. Now, it was united by a shared sense of justice, and Michael had become an unexpected hero. One sunny afternoon, Michael received a message from his lawyer. "Karen's lawyer is sending a cease and desist letter," it read. "They're demanding you take down the video." Michael didn't even flinch. This was a battle he had already won. Sure enough, later that evening, the letter arrived. It was a formal request, claiming that Michael's video was defamation and violated Karen's privacy rights. They argued that the dyeing incident was an accident, and that Michael's portrayal of her in the video was misleading. They demanded he remove it from all platforms immediately. Michael read through it carefully, then forwarded it to his lawyer with a simple note. "Respond with a compilation of all her trespassing incidents, complete with timestamps and documented police reports." He wasn't worried. He knew he had the evidence on his side. He had the security footage, the police reports, the video, and the receipts. When Karen's lawyer responded, they quickly realized they had no leg to stand on. Michael's evidence was airtight. As the days passed, the whispers in the neighborhood began to die down. But Karen's reputation didn't fade. In fact, it was solidifying into local legend. People were talking about her less in hushed tones and more in bold statements, making her an infamous example of what happens when you cross the line. Meanwhile, Michael's video continued to spread. Despite Karen's attempts at damage control, the internet had made its verdict, and Karen's face, forever tinged green, had become an iconic image of schadenfreude. The video was shared across Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, its reach growing exponentially. It wasn't long before Karen's real estate agency couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. Potential clients began asking about her behavior. Local news stations, initially reluctant to report on what they deemed a neighborhood squabble, soon found themselves forced to address the situation. After all, what could be more newsworthy than an entitled woman getting her comeuppance in the most unforgettable way possible? Within a week, Karen's agency posted a public apology, stating that they did not condone the behavior seen in the video. The apology was swiftly followed by a statement from Karen herself, though it felt more like a last-ditch attempt to salvage what was left of her career. "I regret what happened," she said, her green-tinted face still visible in the video. "But I'm just trying to keep the community together. I never meant to hurt anyone." Her message was lost. The more she spoke, the worse it got. In a cruel twist of irony, the video that had humiliated her kept circulating. Her face, forever associated with the color green, became the symbol of self-righteous entitlement gone wrong. Then came the news that was the final blow. Karen had been forced to put her house on the market. The property, once the pride of her portfolio, now had a new reputation. The house of the woman who got green from trespassing. Prospective buyers would be shown around the house, but the story of Karen's antics always came up in the conversation. Oh, you're interested in the house next door to the viral Karen incident? Yeah, that one's a real piece of history. Can you imagine living next to someone who had that video go viral? Within 2 weeks, a for sale sign was planted in front of her house. And even as the new buyers began showing interest, they too were met with the same question from neighbors. You do know what happened with the previous owner, right? By the time Karen's moving truck rolled away, Michael had already started to enjoy his weekend pool parties in full swing. His BBQs were now a regular event. Neighbors who had once avoided him were now gathering in his backyard, and it wasn't just for the food. They genuinely enjoyed his company. They had seen what standing up to a bully could do, and Michael's calm, composed handling of the situation had brought them all closer. Michael didn't care much for the accolades, though. He cared about the peace of his neighborhood. He cared about how standing firm in the face of adversity had created a space where respect and trust could thrive. As for Karen, her attempts at revenge backfired spectacularly. She had tried to organize a neighborhood meeting under the guise of discussing the dangers of pool chemicals, but only 3 people showed up, and those 3 wore green ribbons in silent solidarity with Michael. At the local golf club, Karen's husband could be heard venting to his friends. Do you know how hard it is to close a real estate deal when your wife is literally green? He complained. She can't even show houses right now. People keep asking if she's feeling well. That was the cherry on top, the final act in Michael's saga of victory. And so, Michael's life returned to normal. The pool parties continued, but now they were filled with laughter, community spirit, and a sense of victory. Michael had taken a stand, and his neighborhood had rallied behind him. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving.